Well, good afternoon, RCHWN. I just wanted to welcome everybody here. I am Rebecca Alba, the Creator of Opportunities with RCHWN. And today I would like to give some brief reminders before we introduce our speaker and presenter for the day. Our CHW store is live, and we are always looking for suggestions on different merchandise that you may like. As soon as our new website launches, which is I'm hoping by next week, we will have all new merchandise in our store. As a reminder, our sixth annual conference and retreat is going to be held this year in Gulf Shores, Alabama, in partnership with Mobile Health Department. It is going to be on April 13th through the 15th. Our early bird tickets are on sale until January 1st. They are $50. Effective January 1st, they will go up to $100. As a member, you are responsible for your travel as well as your hotel room. If you need assistance, please feel free to reach out to me. And we do have a scholarship application. We are still accepting members. Oh, I guess I should have updated the 2021 to 22, but that's my fault, sorry. Membership campaign is open. You can refer colleagues and friends. And for doing so, you will get a gift from me in the mail as a thank you. Membership for new and renewals is $25. We are looking forward to next year's Learning Collaborative suggestions for 2023. You can email me with topics or speakers that you would like to hear from. We are in the works of getting that moving. So anybody who wants to be involved, please just let me know. And today I would like to introduce to you all Andrea Foster. She comes to us from Everyday Life Consulting. She has a wonderful background. She is extremely knowledgeable in all topics. And today is going to share with us DEIJ Doesn't Have to Scare You, Learning the Facets of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Rebecca. So we'll go ahead and get started, but I did want to note, because we're recording, but I'd like this to be a safe space, let's hold comments or questions until the end, and then we'll stop recording, and then we'll open it up so we can have a more open dialogue and no one has to worry about what they say being posted on the internet. So that's my plan, but again, if it's really burning, by all means, ask and we'll make sure we address it. So thank you very much, and I'll have Rebecca go ahead and put that slide up unless you have. Perfect.
Okay. That?
Nope, that's fine.
It's
just in a different format. You are all good. I'm waiting for it to, there we go. Perfect. I just needed to get my configuration going here. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so just a little bit about me. Andrea Foster, pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a mother, a partner, a community member. My full-time position is at the Michigan Health Improvement Alliance. I'm the Chief of Staff and the Director for Program Development and Opioid Response. I also work part-time at the Midland County Juvenile Care Center, or their detention center, running their Midland Mentors program. I have a certificate in nonprofit management from Duke University. I'm an alum of both the Shift Institute's Emerging Leaders Program and the Henry Marsh Institute for Public Policy. I sit on the City of Saginaw's Police Advisory Commission, and I chair the Covenant Neighborhood Association here in Saginaw. And recently I was recognized by Cranes Detroit as a notable LGBTQ person in business. Next slide, please. And actually skip this one too. Perfect. All right, I do want to learn about all of you, but I don't want to put everyone on the spot right now and take that time. So I'm going to respect our time and plow through a little bit here today. So our goals are really to start understanding the basic DEIJ terms and concepts. That's diversity, equity, inclusion, justice. You'll see them jumbled around in all sorts of manners, but those are the four letters to really pay attention to. J is my favorite part of this. It's justice, and we're just now starting to work that in a little bit better, but in my opinion, you can't do any of the other things without the justice part. So I also want to help you understand a little bit more about how to be an active ally or enact some allyship, but not be necessarily performative. I think a lot of times, especially corporations, let's use Pride Month, for example, a whole lot of corporations using that concept to sell you rainbow things and jack up the price. But then at the end of the day, are they supporting their LGBT community? Who knows? So, that is an example, as if they're not doing anything to support the community outside of that. Learning ways to advocate for practices that support DEIJ and helping implement them in spaces that are both local and large scale. that comes upon all of us as allies in some way, shape, or form to other marginalized communities. So that's something I want to touch on as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to go through some terms and definitions. It's a little bit dry. Write down any questions you have. Happy to talk about them afterwards. Next. All right, next slide, please. There we go. All right, justice, in my opinion, the most important of these. So I put it first. It's a very multifaceted word. It can obviously have legal implications. It can refer to a person presiding over a court of law. It can mean a balancing of the scales. It can also mean to right a wrong. And a lot of the ways what we discuss will be focused on the righting of wrongs. If something has been done historically that is systemically racist or systemically oppressive, it's our job to help right that wrong or balance those scales again. And that's what we talk about most when we refer to justice. But we can also talk about a very, very broken justice system and a very broken legal system that has historically caused so many issues and has a lot of work to do. Next slide, please. Equity, distributing resources based on the needs of those receiving them. Everyone gets what they need. They might get equal access, but equity is when you get everything that you need. And we'll go a little more in depth on that in a moment. Diversity is the range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, religious or ethical value systems, national origin, political beliefs, etc., etc., etc. Anything that makes you different in general from the very average American view of straight, white, male, whatever, all of the, if the rules were made for you, you know it. If they weren't made for you, you know it. If they weren't made for you, you're probably part of a diverse community. Next slide, please. Inclusion is the act of bringing those folks in. So the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. Also the practice or policy of providing equal access and opportunities to those resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or mental disabilities and members of other minority groups. Next slide, please. So equity versus equality. This is a big one. And typically, I got to give this presentation last week in person, and I loved the flow of it. So I know this is a little bit different being virtual. But you know, if you do feel like you have something you want to say or chat about, feel free to interrupt me. I'm more than happy to put your little hand up if you want in the emoji bar. But I think these are good conversations to have in addition to just terms. Again, we'll hold them afterwards as well, but just keep that in mind if you want to chat about it later. So equality has everything to do with giving everyone the exact same resources, whereas equity involves distributing those resources based on the needs of the recipient. And I believe the next slide should have a very common but helpful resource. There we go. So if everyone can see this, I think we've all seen the fence piece, right? On the very, very far left, you've got equality. So that's the assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports. We do not all benefit from the same supports. If everyone's getting the same level of height in the boxes, not everyone can see over the fence. They all get the same thing, but they don't all get to see. They're all part of the entire game and viewing that and being a part of its membership. So when we look at the middle and its equity, everyone gets the supports that they need. So one person might only need one box, the other person needs two boxes. But that whole concept means everyone's able to be on the same level because they're getting what they need to meet that level. Justice is then getting rid of the whole dang fence. That fence does not need to exist in the first place. Why is there a reason? Why can't people all see the game anyways? So you can see without the supports or the accommodations, they aren't needed because the barrier's been removed. The cause of the inequity itself was addressed. That is indicative of justice. If we have a massive issue or a wall or something that a lot of people can't get through or get over in order to be able to have the same access or the same rights or the same opportunities as others, why not get rid of the barrier itself? The less we put in front of people, the more likely they are to be able to be a part of it, right? Next slide, please. So we'll go into some systemic injustices. I feel like I'm breezing through this quickly, but we'll leave lots of time for pause at the end. But next slide, please. We'll go a little bit in depth here. So systemic or institutional racism. Systemic racism, structural and institutional racism, those are all one and the same. These are systems, processes, structures, generally created by white people or Americans in power. I'm speaking specifically to this country. And these are people that have historically been oppressed or denied access to those who are marginalized. So I think we're all pretty familiar with our country's history. You can go read A People's History of the United States if you really want to get depressed for a while. But, you know, there's a lot there. And unpacking it all is probably 5 different college courses in one. But I think we're pretty aware of it. I will come up with some different scenarios here if needed. But at the end of the day, perpetuated systemic racism and inequities often center around economic disparities, health disparities, and police violence. Think about, we'll even use housing issues. I think they called it redlining and greenlining. Not too long ago, actually, in our country's history, people of color could not get a loan to get certain houses. And if they did, or they already had them, we did all kinds of redistricting to make it virtually impossible for them to keep that land and keep that property so we could break up families. And when we did that, oh, I see a hand up. Yes.
Yes. The big problem now was gentrification. That is a very big issue, especially in the more bigger urban cities. That is a huge, huge problem.
100%. Absolutely. And I mean, I live in Saginaw. I live right downtown. It's one of the rougher areas, but I can afford to live here. As a single mom who has to work 2 jobs, I know that if my daughter has a medical need, I can help meet it because I have a home I can afford, right? If I had tried to rent, I would be paying 3 times the cost and I would not have a home that I could afford, and I would then have a lot less to work with to provide for my child. That said, I was lucky enough to have good enough credit to be able to get said loan. Now, if you don't have the right credit because perhaps you've been in poverty, you've been in all these other systems that have helped keep you suppressed, many of us know it is more expensive to be poor than it will ever be to start out with funding, right? So when you go through all these different parts of life and pieces of life that just really don't allow you to get ahead of the curve, you aren't probably going to have good credit. If you can't get a loan for one reason or another, you can't get a credit card for one reason or another, you're not going to be able to build said credit. And let's see something happens in your life where you can't pay off this debt that you have to have in order to build credit. You're going to get further and further down the line. You can't even get a house. You can't, if you have student loans of a certain amount, you cannot qualify for housing loans, certainly not conventional ones. So, you know, I'm very privileged in the amount of ways in which I've been able to make certain choices based on my life circumstances that allow me to have really good credit. Not everyone gets those same opportunities. That's a great example. And gentrification makes it worse, right? So let's say we have this same town I'm in. It's starting to be, if you look at the housing costs, they're starting to creep up more and more because more and more people in the general area are realizing that housing prices are skyrocketing. And this is one of the only areas you can get an affordable home. I have a 3-bedroom, 1 bath right downtown. I paid very low amount for it. It was probably at least half that cost 3 years ago. We're seeing things change due to the pandemic. We're seeing them change due to the economy. We're seeing all these changes. But the more and more people like me, people with credit, people with enough funding to be able to provide for themselves, come to the places that the less affordable or the more affordable housing is, the less available that stock is going to become for everyone else. And so when we have more and more people who have had all these opportunities like myself coming into the area, taking up that housing, they're going to be given first rights because they're going to have better credit, better loan access. They're going to have conventional loans. They're going to have everything they need in place already. They're going to have the affordable houses. And so we're slowly not going to have anything for people to have at the end of the day. And those costs are going to be so astronomical that not even your average Single mom with 2 jobs can get that place if they have the credit. So that's the process of gentrification. And we see it in all the major cities, absolutely 100%. We're probably going to start seeing it here at some point. And there's a whole lot of other things we need to fix before we get there. I would love that, but can't guarantee it because people are going to go where they can afford to live, right? So I say this because I've done a whole lot of community work here and in the short amount of time I've been able to live here. And I think I've found that the places with the most injustice, the most systemic poverty, the most health disparities, those are the places with the most heart. You've got the most people throwing themselves into having a better neighborhood because they can't get out. There's nowhere else for them to go. That is really important. And that I think is a really good example of when people automatically don't want to live somewhere, or they automatically won't put themselves in a situation because they believe that they can do better, or they have all these ideas that it's too violent, too whatever. It's not for them, right? Great. That's fine, because that's how we keep gentrification from coming up on our heels here. But that's also indicative of the folks who do stay, the folks who make choices to be here, because those are the ones who are going to be the change makers in your community. So thank you. I can't see your name, wonderful person who raised their hand, but I appreciate your comment. Does that kind of encompass what you were talking about? Yes. Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So history. Obviously, our entire history of this country is based on racism. Slaughter, stealing of land, and erasure of indigenous peoples' cultures were some of the first acts we did as settlers on this continent. And then we brought in some slavery. Human trafficking is one of the biggest and oldest trades in our entire history of people in general. That has not ended. It might have changed the way it looks, the way people are used and utilized. It is still very much a part of our country and a part of our world. And obviously, this is a great time to acknowledge we are on indigenous land, currently sitting on Chippewa land. We've got Ojibwe not too far. All of Michigan has a beautiful history. If you have the opportunity to go visit the museum at the Saginaw Chippewa tribe, they have one of the best examples of colonialism, and showing that in the right way that doesn't whitewash it or gloss over everything. I think that's really important, and it's been acknowledged by museums across the country as one of our best. Go, utilize it, check it out. Highly recommend.
Hoyt Library has a great thing on that too. You just have to go and ask. I'm a person that likes to look up things on my own. So Hoyt, if you go to Hoyt Library, they have the perfect setup. All you have to do is ask. I think you have to go upstairs or like at the top of the building, but if you go up there and ask anything about it, they will. It is a lot. It is a lot.
Good. Thank you. That's great information. I did not know that. Hoyt Libraries in Saginaw, if you're not familiar with it, very, very good place to go. And the people in the area she's talking about here, really, really kind people. They want to help. They want to talk to you. Do not be afraid to waltz in there. It's a great little library. So thank you for that as well. Okay, next slide, please. Marginalized communities. What are they? How are folks in marginalized communities disproportionately affected by existing policies and practices? So someone asked me last time, I put an X in folks. How can you do that? What's the point? When we talk a lot about gender identity, people may not necessarily adhere to one type of gender or another. The term folks in and of itself can be very much all-encompassing. When you put the X in there, sometimes it's just a nice acknowledgement of, we acknowledge that we are speaking to people as a collective, not specifically one gender or another. That's a kind of fuzzy example of it, but there's other ways in which you can do that. If you really want to look further into that, into how to address people and talk to them without assuming a gender, there are all kinds of terms you can use that are non-gendered. You can say, instead of, my favorite that I've heard, and it was kind of joking, but instead of ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlethems. I thought that was great. But there's all kinds of options out there. If you like me, you like to play with language, you like to get interested in different ways to look at things and different ways to be inclusive. Language is one of my favorite ones. And we're not really taught that, right? We have to go look for it. So even just looking up non-gendered terms or all-encompassing terminology to use when addressing people, great way to start. So yes, folks in marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by existing policies and practices. that is a whole lot of people in general do not fit the general idea of what the population has been built for, what society has been built for, right? The makeup of our country, if you look at it, if you look at even the racial makeup of our country, we are more and more diverse and more full of color and more full of life and languages and religions than we have ever been. But you will find that society has not adapted. Our justice systems have not adapted. Our medical systems have not adapted. Our government has not adapted. So we aren't serving our country in the same ways we could be. And we're certainly not serving the population that exists within it. We are serving the same folks it's been built for. And so a big part of what you can do is be a part of those changes, even if they feel really little, something like saying folks or, they instead of she or he can start to make those changes. I have a friend who is non-binary. They work as a medical biller in an office in Frankenmuth. And when they started, their EMR, or electronic medical records, did not list an option for non-binary. It was only male or female. They petitioned the folks not only at their offices, but the folks who made the EMR record system and said, hey, Epic or whoever it was, why isn't this here? This could be added and you could have a lot better data, and you can also be serving the people you serve instead of just trying to fit them in a space they don't fit. And they made that change for them. That was huge. And that's just one person reaching out and saying, hey, this could be different. Did it affect them? Absolutely. It affected them personally. Are there ways that we can notice that too and not put that burden on the person who it affects immediately? Absolutely. Because it is just as, I'm not non-binary. I identify as female. I am female. I have the privilege of identifying with the gender I was born with, right? I can see that they is not an option somewhere, and I can go say, hey, can we talk about that and maybe find a way to add it so you can have your clients and your employees and the people you work with feel better and more included? Because you never know who might identify with one tiny word change. I find that to be really important. So we'll talk a little bit more about other ways to be an ally, but I think when we put the burden or the responsibility on those who are experiencing the injustice, we're not helping anyone. Granted, they will probably end up doing a lot of that work anyway, because we always have had to. If you don't know we're here, I can't tell you what to change. But part of my job is to tell you that we're here and that you can look for some of these changes and advocate for them. So that's really what we're talking about here. I'm not here to call anyone out. I'm not here to put anyone on the spot and say, you're wrong, you're not doing it right. How come? Tell everyone. What I want you to think about is, okay, I feel included here. Who's not in this room? Who can I bring in? How can I help other people feel and be accepted and part of wherever your setting is, whatever you're thinking through here, even planning a conference, there's ways that this can be done. Who's not at the table? How do I bring them into the table and how do I be a part of that? And so a big part of what we're doing here is just demystifying some of this stuff to help you have a little bit more confidence in what you're saying when you start to approach these concepts or when you start advocating for other people. It can be really scary when you don't feel like you're an expert on that topic. You don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You're like, oh, what if I'm trying to help, but I'm making it worse? That happens, and it can be really scary. So that's part of what we're talking about here today. Next slide, please. So BIPOC, you might hear this term a lot. You might see it a lot. It is inclusive of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Not all at once, but people who identify or are Black, people who are Indigenous, and people of color in general. That's a whole group of individuals. So this term is deeper than just people of color or just marginalized or minority. It's a person-first language. It's directly addressing people who have historically and systemically dealt with most of this first in our country. So we talk about it as a person-first term and language. Next slide, please. So what you can do as an ally: demand justice. Doesn't have to be just for yourself, but you can start to demand it. And when I say demand, I know I just said we're not going to get up shouting on the top steps. Sometimes there's a time for that and a place for that. If you're at a rally that is supporting people For instance, let's think about this horrific attack that was at a club called Club Q, and it was an attack on LGBT people. And 5 of us were killed because someone walked in with a gun. And this was this past week. And it's just like Club Pulse all over again. And if you're familiar with these things, if you're not, I'd highly recommend looking it up. But this is a stark reminder that these things are happening every single day in our communities, whether we experience them or not. There is a time and a place to get mad. There is a time and a place to stand up. And there is a time and a place to make your voice heard. This is one of those times. This sort of thing is one of those times where you can say this is unacceptable and we will not stand for it. There's been a lot of silence around even this event, as opposed to looking back on Club Pulse. And I think it's really, really important that, and this is a good example of ways that we should be standing up and being loud about how not okay these things are, right? But that's not always the answer. The answer isn't always to get in someone's face, because you can do a lot more harm than good if you're going to get in someone's face and say, you're wrong. Because who made you that authority, right? You could say, here's where this affects me from this perspective. Here's where this affects someone else from that perspective. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish by explaining that. And you can do with that what you will. But if our goal is to do X, Y, and Z, perhaps we could try A, B, and C. That's a much easier way than getting up and saying, hey, you're wrong. You need to be doing this and I don't like it. Which one do you think is going to actually have a difference in the long term and in the real world? Saying, hey, let's just talk about it like humans. Assume we're all coming from different places. Don't assume that anyone is coming from a certain place. But let's all maybe talk about it so we can think about getting on the same page or ways to at least understand each other better. These are the ways to have those conversations. And there are absolutely times where I want to get mad and I want to shout and I get passionate and I get angry. Absolutely. We have rights to be all of those things. And we can have that anger for others and be an ally in that way. But we can also start to request and ask for justice and ask for things to be changed. Next slide, please. So being allies, I know the term ally is thrown around a lot, but really it's just the practice of using your privilege to advocate for, create change, restore or enact justice for those whose voices are not heard, listened to, or have been systemically oppressed. Even the term privilege can really set people off. That's a whole different conversation, but I'll explain to you one of the ways in which it recently was most put to me that made a lot of sense for me. So in my full-time job, I do work with overdose survivors. And we essentially go see them within 72 hours of the event of their overdose and let them know they're cared for. What do you need? How can we help you? We have absolutely resources for you to help enter recovery if you're ready for that. If you need groceries, we'll go with you to the grocery store. We just want you to know that we care, right? But a big part of that is being able to go out into the community and advocate for things like what's called harm reduction. These are just Narcan, for instance, is a life-saving drug. It only works on opioids, but if someone has an overdose, you take this little thing, it's like Flonase almost, and it goes one shot in each nose, one for each, and that will save someone's life. It'll bring them back from that overdose for 15 minutes while you call the 911 or whomever to come help with the rest. Now, it's a lot easier for me to say and talk to people about this than it is for my good friend Phyllis. And she's given me permission to use this story. So she is in her 70s. She has survived an overdose at least 15 to 20 times. She's been long-term in recovery for over 20 years, but she was in and out of rehabilitation facilities at least 6 or 7 times. And she is one of the strongest women I've ever met in my life. And she's the first one to tell me, you're a pretty white lady. You can get into a whole lot of rooms that I can't. Because people are going to hear that I have lived experiences or I'm a survivor or I am in recovery, they're automatically not going to listen to me. But if you walk in that room and you, with the way that you talk, because I was given a very different education than she was, she's like, you can waltz into that room and have people listen to you. They will automatically listen to you more. And that's really sad. People should be first and foremost listening to the people who are experiencing this and the people who are advocates for what has changed their life, right? But if she's sitting there saying, I appreciate you because you can get into those rooms, then I'm going to get in those rooms. I'm going to keep going into those rooms, and I'm going to keep using my voice to help people who have experienced this and help them have a voice, or at least be able to say, hi, my name's Andrea. Thanks for letting me in this room. Here's Phyllis. You need to listen to what Phyllis has to say. Phyllis has experienced this, but you let me in the room first, so thank you. You know, that's an example of being able to use my privilege. I know who I am. I know what I've been given. I know what I'm not. But what I'm not afraid to do is talk to people in certain places, people who are making rules, people who are making changes in the community. I have no problem walking up to someone and saying, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this, because I think you're missing a big chunk of the population that could really benefit if you made this change. People will listen to that. And it really, I hate to say it, it depends on what you look like, how you talk, who you are, what rooms you can get into. I can put on a cocktail dress and talk to just about anyone in a room. But if I'm using that voice to advocate for a change that's going to help a whole lot of other people who aren't usually listened to, that is a great way to explain allyship. That's just kind of what I'm talking about here. Get in the room, use your voice if you find it's the right place. Maybe it's not. But again, basic concepts here. So next slide, please. We want to fight for better laws, right? That can start locally, can start statewide, it can start nationally. We have broken laws in this country. If you look at incarceration rates and the data behind it, Black men are disproportionately put in jail and institutionalized, and that's not okay. The war on drugs, again, keep in mind, I am not a fan because I work in that realm. The war on drugs hasn't worked. What it has done is has caused mass incarceration to people of color of all kinds. So that's one thing right there. Let's break those laws, right? Let's start looking at it and let's see who's this hurting, who's it helping. When you start to see our federal government do mass decriminalization and pardons of people who have marijuana arrests, that's a good step. Let's start talking more about that. How do we start making laws that allow people to get back into where they need to be to reset from this issue? Because if I had been caught with a joint somewhere, it might have a much bigger difference. This is back when it's illegal. Much bigger difference if I was a Black man. I would be institutionalized or put in the prison system for that. Whereas I could probably maybe waltz away from it or get a much lighter sentence. So those are examples. How do we fix these laws? Just because it doesn't affect me doesn't mean I can't advocate for it to be better for someone else, because we all want that same, we don't all need the same height of the box. We need the box we need to get us to see the game over that fence. You can vote for people who have already done these things. I know politicians don't always do what they say they're going to do, so that's a fuzzy one. But if they say they're going to do it and you want to vote for them, great. Hopefully they come through. If not, that's on them either way. But you can donate to or volunteer with organizations who are already serving these people in marginalized communities. That's my favorite one. That is a great way to do it. And if you have money, by all means, just give them the money. They love your time. They love your food drives. They loved your canned food and all of those things that are wonderful and doing good things in our community. But I think a lot of times what we can do as donors is try and give someone what we think they need. If you have the ability, just give them some money. They will put it to good use and they will help. They know the best way to do it. So that's one of my favorite things. Absolutely vote, use your political power, use your voice. Don't assume that's going to fix everything, and it's certainly not going to do it in a quick amount of time. If you want to make a direct impact quickly, donate, volunteer, share information, whatever you can in your capacity economically to help those organizations who are already helping the people dealing with these issues right here and now. It's a great way to start. Next slide, please. Using that voice and privilege, like we talked, talking to politicians, speaking up when you see these injustices, leading the charge and righting those wrongs in places closest to you. Start with your workplace. See if you can get the system to get changed on your computer to allow you in there, or allow someone you know who might need a space in there. Start with community organizations, your church even. A lot of churches are very diverse. A lot of churches are very inclusive. You can help promote that. You can help make some of those changes. We can all work to make small changes that end up making a really big difference, even if it's just one person. That's better than no one, right? That's better than sticking your head in the sand. we can always do something to help one person feel a whole lot better. A change as small as using a trans kid's name, not the name they were given, but the name that is theirs, that they have claimed, can lessen the suicide rate by 40%. Just use their name. That is such a small change, right? Acknowledging their gender. Yes, I'm seeing a hand waved.
I'm just saying, because I used to work with kids in youth care, and that does make a big difference. It really does, because they deal with a lot and their parents are not so accepting. So when you I worked for a place recently, and it was a young person there, and they were transgender. And at first, me being old school, it was kind of hard at first with the term, but after a while, it just flowed like water, and that made that it just brightened their day. It brightened their day. I did, after a while, it's like I didn't see any difference because the mannerisms, but it was like, okay, well, if that's what you want, that's what you want. And it just made their day. And then not only that, but I hated the fact that the place where I was at was putting a restriction on certain things. And I feel like if you're going to accept the fact that they chose that for themselves, you have to accept everything else. You can't tell them, we accept the fact that you identify, but we're going to put restrictions on what you can and can't do. It doesn't work that way. Everything has to go hand in hand. If you're going to accept the fact that I'm accepting who I am, accept the fact that I want to do this as I would if I was actually in that predicament. So to me, I feel like you are absolutely correct. It does make a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you coming from that perspective. Working in a juvenile detention center, I've had a lot of interactions with these kids too. I worked with kids in alternative high schools before that, doing conservation work. And boy, using a kid's name or respecting their gender in the middle of or even beginning of their transition, that will just change their life right there. It'll save it. It will save their life. I was so proud to work in a space where when they got their first trans student coming in, they hired me to train every single person on staff in how to work with that person and how to make it easier. Did it fix everything? No. Did it make it easy? No. You also are working with a population that can be really volatile and troublesome and hard to work with in general, and they will use anything they can, if they can, to get under your skin when it's something that's harming them or they feel like it. So, it's still really hairy and really sticky sometimes, but it's important that we try. Because if let's say you have two spaces, one of them accepts you, one of them doesn't. The one that doesn't isn't going to be the one that wins out that you choose to spend your time in. What if the one that accepts you is harming you in other ways? If you are the most accepting room who is doing the most good for that person and they choose you, that's going to change their whole life. So, these little things that we think might seem small can actually completely change the trajectory of not just a person, but an organization, of a community. These are big, big changes, and they feel small. And I have to tell myself this every day when I feel like there is too much. I'm not making a difference. What are we doing here? All we're hearing is the hard, bad stuff in the media. You're hearing constant negativity. Everything's wrong. Feels like you're not making a change or making a difference. But if you ever talk to one person who said, hey, that thing that you said really helped me, it's a great green light to keep doing it. So those are the voices and the ways that you can help, and the small changes that make a big impact. And thank you for your comments. All right, next slide, please. And then bringing diversity to your spaces. Are you on a board? Are you part of a community group? Advocate for someone totally different than you to be part of it as well. Bring in the diversity to your community bring in the diversity that your community has to offer. And not just racial, I'm talking economic diversity, sexual orientation and gender identity, people with disabilities, people who need all the accessibility they can get. If they're not at the table, bring them in. We were in conservation, when I did conservation work beforehand, there is not a lot of room for people with disabilities that are physical to be in conservation. We say, well, okay, we made an ADA accessible path, cool. In one of your preserves, and you have 8 of them, and it's for half a mile, but you have 30 miles of trails. What more can we do here? If you don't bring someone in who has that voice too, you may not even think about it. But if you're sitting across from them at a boardroom at a table, you might make a board vote that makes changes to help make that change, because that person's talking to you and you're thinking about them directly and you've brought them into the table. Just make space for other people who aren't you. If they look different, if they feel different, if you say this person isn't at the table, these voices are not represented, bring them in. All right, next slide, please. Being inclusive and not performative. We talked a little bit about this, but don't just invite the person to the table, listen. Don't just say you want to make these changes, actually make them, but then do it for the right reasons and do it with actual heart behind it. Because if we just say, hey, we love diversity, we love everyone, but we haven't changed anything to make them feel more included or make them feel more a part of the group, then we're just being performative, right? We're slapping that gay rainbow sticker up in June on our Nike shoes or whatever, and as soon as it's July, that sucker's coming right back down. That is my best example I can give because it had personal experience in this world, right? So, you can't say you want to make the best cake ever. You can't keep certain ingredients out and still make the right cake. You got to have all the pieces, all of it. All right, next slide, please. And then teaching others. This is the most important one. Teaching your friends, your children, your family members. It's almost Thanksgiving. I'm not saying show up tomorrow and start railing on people to change their ways of life. This may not be the time, but there are times when it's right? There's times, there's opportunities, and we don't always know what's best. I mess up all the time, y'all, all the time. And it's happened frequently. And you know what I do is I say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I didn't see it like that. I'm going to work on that. And that's it. I don't have to do a big, long apology. If I get someone's gender wrong, if I get their name wrong, be like, sorry, I'll do better. That's it. They don't need the apology. They don't need the whole explanation. That's for me, right? Just acknowledge it and move on. You can do work on your own later to understand it more. You can do work on your own later to accept things differently, but that's your work to do, right? So when someone says, hey, hopefully with some grace and compassion and not a lot of anger, because again, that puts everyone on the offensive. Hopefully someone can say it in the right way. And that's what's really important when you teach, right? So we all need people to teach us during different moments. Maybe you're the one being taught, maybe you're teaching someone else. I was raised very differently than my daughter is. I was raised in very restrictive religious environments. I was raised to believe that everything that I am inside as a person is a sin and is wrong. So you can imagine it took some work to pull myself out of that, right? It takes a lot of people, a lot of work to get where they are today. So being able to start by teaching and my daughter comes home from her first day at her new school and she says, Mom, I've got 2 new friends. One name is Ace and they're non-binary. And I have this other friend who's blah, 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 and they're going on. And I'm like, that's awesome. And I wish I'd been able to say that because we didn't embrace kids with different genders, much less who are LGBT when I was going to school. And we certainly didn't support them and use their names, right? They would have been beaten up. Let's be real. So I grew up in Midland. It's a very, very different time, different world, different place. I will say even Midland's trying real hard to do better. Some places do it better than others, but we're all trying, so that's good. But I get to teach my daughter, and I have an opportunity, and we'll come home and she'll say, Mom, this happened to me today, and I don't understand it. Why were they so mad at me? And I'll say, well, let's think through it. Maybe they were wrong, maybe you were wrong, maybe you guys just need to have a better conversation, but let's talk through different perspectives, and then maybe hopefully they're in a place where they can have a conversation about it if you want to talk about it some more. But, that's not always for us to decide. So it's tough. It's really hard. None of this is easy. Like I said, you're not going to get it right away. I don't get it every time. I'm learning every single day. We haven't even gone through implicit biases, probably a whole other training. But there is a lot out there to learn, and it can be super overwhelming and super exhausting to even think about. You can just pick one thing and think about it for a while and work on it. You don't have to do it all at once. You can pick the thing that seems easiest to you, but you might need a little more exposure to. Start small, but just trying, people will see, they will notice, they will understand. You don't have to be perfect. Absolutely no one is. But if you're able to try and you're coming from a right place, people can tell. People can really tell when you're being authentic and you're trying. And that's the biggest thing. And that's the biggest thing for people. If you're scared at all or trepidatious or just not feeling like you're in a space to even be the one teaching or leading or guiding, much less speaking up, pick something small and learn about it. But you got to try, because someone's going to see you trying and they're going to get inspired and they're going to be grateful. And that's all you can do. Last slide. And then big one is just, if you have it, put your money where your mouth is. We don't all have it. I don't necessarily have it. I'm not making donations this year. I made a whole lot of donations to the medical center this year. And we all know that that is a mortgage and a half sometimes. So if you do have the ability and you want to spend your money and you want to support local, support small businesses, support ones that are owned and operated by people who have been historically oppressed. Go with your BIPOC population. Those are who disabled, LGBTQ, other marginalized people. Tell everyone you know how great those businesses and initiatives are, if you believe that, and how to support them too. It can be as small as sharing on your Facebook page, sharing on some other page, making an effort to help other people see it. You know, if I can't necessarily give a ton of money to, say, Great Lakes Bay Pride, my favorite local organization, if I can't give them a ton of money this year, I can at least spend a few bucks here and there, maybe go to their events. I can bring other friends. I can try to get people to get tickets to things and go with me. You know, everything counts, right? So local efforts are great if you want to go statewide. There's statewide organizations, there's nationwide ones all over the place. And if you ever have questions or want to know anything more, you're more than welcome to email me and I'll be happy to answer as best I can or find someone who can answer better than me. But that is one of my biggest recommendations. Next slide. And the last thing is just don't just sit there and be quiet. Silence is complicity. If you see something that you know is wrong happening in front of you and it is safe, you know you're not going to be physically harmed for standing up and speaking out and helping that person, or even if you do, whatever you feel is right in the moment, do something, right? Find a way to do something. Don't learn and then just not use that knowledge. You're going to learn it and you're going to use it, because there's that very famous, now very, very famous quote of, when we know better, we do better. You're starting to learn and you're knowing, and it's, you got to change accordingly and help others do the same. So that's really what we're asking here, is don't just sit and be silent and not do anything. Your learning is you not being silent, you trying, you showing up for this, you making the effort to understand something you didn't understand today or even 2 hours ago, is you trying, and that's doing good work. So, you know, if we're just sticking our heads in the sand, we're not making that difference. Next. And that's it. So I realize I didn't leave a ton of time for conversation, but at this point, I'm going to ask that we stop recording. And then we can have any conversation that we do have room for. And if not, I want you to contact me. This is my info.
I would
here.
like to say thank you very much, everybody, for being on the call. And I'm going to turn off the recording right now. And Andrea, thanks for a great presentation.